On a cold January morning in 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall bent down at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, California, and picked up a few small, glittering flakes from the water. He had no idea that this quiet moment would unleash one of the largest mass migrations in human history, transforming a sleepy harbor village called Yerba Buena into the roaring boomtown of San Francisco. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, sketches, and photographs to life, shifting perspective, changing camera angles, and moving through scenes in ways their original artists never could. From the first discovery to the city's explosive transformation, this is San Francisco during the gold rush. Before the rush, before the chaos, there was only silence and a gleam in the water. This scene attempts to capture that moment at Sutter's Mill on January 24th, 1848. When James Marshall, inspecting the tail race of a sawmill under construction, noticed unusual metal flakes catching the morning light. He gathered a few pieces, tested them carefully, and confirmed what would change California forever: gold. At the time, California belonged to Mexico, though that would change within weeks when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo officially transferred it to the United States. Marshall and his employer, John Sutter, tried to keep the discovery quiet, hoping to secure their claims before word spread. But secrets like this don't keep. By spring, rumors drifted through California's scattered settlements. A storekeeper in San Francisco named Sam Brannan walked through the streets holding a bottle of gold dust above his head, shouting the news to anyone who would listen. His timing was calculated. He had already stocked his store with mining supplies. Within days, the village emptied. Sailors abandoned ships in the harbor. Soldiers deserted their posts. Farmers left crops unharvested. Everyone rushed inland toward the Sierra Nevada foothills, toward a dream they could hold in their hands. This image shows San Francisco, still called Yerba Buena by some, as it appeared in early 1848 before the rush took hold. A modest collection of adobe buildings and wooden shacks scattered around a natural cove, home to roughly 1,000 residents. Ships anchored peacefully in the harbor. Dirt paths served as streets. The settlement existed primarily as a trading post and minor port for hides and tallow from nearby ranchos. Looking at this quiet scene, it's almost impossible to imagine what was about to happen. Within a year, this place would be unrecognizable. By late 1848, news of the California gold discovery reached the eastern United States, carried by newspapers, letters, and President James K. Polk himself, who confirmed the reports in his December address to Congress. The announcement electrified the nation. Throughout the winter of 1848 and into 1849, thousands made preparations. They sold farms, closed businesses, left families, and set out on journeys that would take months and claim many lives. Some traveled overland across the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains, enduring harsh weather, disease, and the constant threat of starvation. Others sailed around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, a voyage of 18,000 miles that could take 5 to 8 months in cramped, storm-battered ships. A third route crossed Panama by land, risking tropical disease to shave months off the journey. They called themselves the 49ers, and they arrived in San Francisco by the thousands. This scene captures the harbor in 1849 as it began to fill with ships from every corner of the world. Vessels from New York, Boston, Liverpool, Sydney, Canton, and Valparaiso crowded the bay. But here's what made San Francisco's harbor unique during the gold rush: the ships didn't leave. Crews abandoned them the moment they dropped anchor, racing off to the gold fields before captains could stop them. By the end of 1849, hundreds of ships sat empty and rotting in the bay, their masts forming a strange forest above the water. Some were eventually dragged ashore, converted into stores, hotels, and warehouses. Others simply sank where they sat. Today, dozens of these ships remain buried beneath San Francisco's modern streets, entombed by landfill as the city expanded into the bay. Stepping ashore in 1849 meant entering a world of constant motion and noise. This image attempts to show the waterfront as it appeared during the rush's peak, crowded with new arrivals hauling trunks and supplies, merchants hawking goods at inflated prices, and the ever-present sound of hammering as buildings rose overnight. Tents and canvas shelters stretched in every direction. There were no real streets yet, just muddy paths churned by foot traffic and wagon wheels. During the rainy season, the mud became so deep that people joked about horses drowning in it. Wooden planks were laid across the worst sections, but they often sank or floated away. One famous story tells of a man who spotted a fine hat lying in the mud on a main street. When he bent to pick it up, he discovered a man's head beneath it. "Can I help you out?" he asked. The man replied, "No, thanks. I've got a good mule under me." The city grew with shocking speed. In 1848, San Francisco's population stood around 1,000. By the end of 1849, it had exploded to 25,000. By 1852, it reached nearly 35,000. People arrived faster than shelter could be built. Canvas tents gave way to wooden shacks, which gave way to hastily constructed frame buildings. But fire remained a constant enemy. San Francisco burned 6 times between December 1849 and June 1851. The buildings were wooden, the streets were narrow, and firefighting equipment was scarce. Each time, the city rebuilt, often within weeks, driven by an almost manic energy. After the devastating fire of May 1851, which destroyed 2,000 buildings, the city began rebuilding before the ashes had cooled. This scene shows Portsmouth Square in the early 1850s, the heart of Gold Rush San Francisco. Originally the central plaza of the small Mexican settlement, it had become the city's unofficial center, surrounded by hotels, gambling halls, saloons, and merchants' offices. Here, fortunes were won and lost. Here, news was shared, deals were struck, and tensions occasionally erupted into violence. In the square's early days, it also served as the site of public announcements, auctions, and even executions, carried out by vigilance committees when the city's formal law enforcement proved inadequate. What made Gold Rush San Francisco truly remarkable was its instant cosmopolitan character. Unlike most American cities that developed gradually, San Francisco became global overnight. Chinese immigrants arrived in significant numbers, fleeing economic hardship and political instability at home, establishing what would become the largest Chinatown outside Asia. Chilean and Peruvian miners brought expertise in hard rock mining. French, German, and Italian immigrants opened restaurants and shops. Australian convicts and gold seekers landed alongside Mexican miners who had been working California placers since before the American takeover. By 1850, nearly half of San Francisco's population was foreign-born. You could walk a single street and hear a dozen languages. This diversity created both opportunity and tension, as racial prejudice, claim jumping, and economic competition sometimes turned violent. Inside a Gold Rush-era hotel or boarding house, life was expensive and crowded. This image attempts to recreate the interior of a typical establishment around 1850. Rooms were scarce and costly. A simple bed in a shared room could cost the same as a decent hotel in New York. Eggs sold for $1 each. A loaf of bread could cost 50 cents when a carpenter back east might earn $1 a day. Everything was inflated because everything was scarce. The city consumed faster than supply lines could deliver. Meals were basic, often just beans, bread, and salted meat. Luxuries like fresh vegetables or milk commanded astronomical prices. Yet despite the hardship and expense, people kept coming, driven by stories of men who struck it rich, who found nuggets the size of eggs, who went from penniless to wealthy in a single afternoon. But here's what the stories often left out. Most 49ers never struck it rich. They worked long, back-breaking hours standing in icy streams, shoveling gravel, and living on minimal rations. Many returned home poorer than when they left. The real fortunes weren't made in the goldfields. They were made in San Francisco by the merchants, the landlords, the saloon keepers, and the suppliers who sold picks, pans, and provisions at massive markups. Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco in 1853 and made his fortune selling durable canvas pants to miners. Sam Brannan, the storekeeper who first publicized the gold discovery, became California's first millionaire not by mining, but by selling supplies. The gold rush created opportunity, but it was rarely where people expected to find it. This scene shows a typical San Francisco street in the early 1850s, as the city began its transition from chaotic camp to permanent settlement. Wooden sidewalks now lined some streets. Frame buildings with glass windows replaced canvas tents. Signs advertised legitimate businesses, banks, newspapers, theaters, and restaurants. Yet the city still had an unfinished provisional quality. Construction never stopped. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air from dawn to dark. Ships continued to arrive, though less frantically than in 1849. The harbor had become a working port rather than a ship graveyard. Streets were graded and planked. Gas lamps appeared. The city was learning to become a city. By 1851, San Francisco's lawlessness had become intolerable. With inadequate police and a corrupt political system, crime flourished. In response, citizens formed the Committee of Vigilance, a controversial organization that took law enforcement into its own hands. This image depicts a vigilance committee gathering. Armed men assembled to hunt down suspected criminals. Between 1851 and 1856, these committees arrested, tried, and sometimes executed those they deemed guilty, operating outside formal legal channels. Their actions remained debated. Some saw them as necessary guardians of order. Others viewed them as mob rule. What's certain is that they reflected a city struggling to establish authority and structure in a place that had grown too fast for traditional institutions to keep pace. Entertainment flourished even amid the chaos. This scene shows the interior of a Gold Rush-era theater, likely around 1852 or 1853. San Francisco developed a vibrant cultural scene surprisingly quickly. Theaters presented Shakespeare, popular melodramas, and variety shows. Famous performers from the East Coast and Europe toured San Francisco, drawn by audiences willing to pay premium prices. The city's saloons and gambling halls ran 24 hours a day. Music, dancing, and cards filled the night. For men far from home, living in a strange and often lonely place, these entertainments offered escape and community. By the mid-1850s, the rush was cooling. The easiest gold had been found. What remained required industrial mining operations, expensive equipment, and hired labor. The solitary miner with a pan and a dream was becoming obsolete. Many 49ers who had stayed in California settled into ordinary trades. They became shopkeepers, farmers, teamsters, and laborers. Some returned home. Others sent for families and put down roots. San Francisco itself was maturing. Churches were built, schools opened, neighborhoods developed distinct characters. The city was still growing, still rough around the edges, but it was no longer a camp. It was becoming permanent. This view shows San Francisco in the mid-1850s from Telegraph Hill, looking down over a city that had transformed in less than a decade. Where once there had been a scattering of buildings around a cove, now stood a dense urban center spreading across hills and filling in shoreline. Wharves extended far into the bay, streets formed a grid. Buildings rose 2, 3, even 4 stories high. The population was still overwhelmingly male, still transient, still driven by commerce and ambition, but the foundations had been laid for something lasting. What the gold rush left behind was more than wealth. It created California as we know it. It brought the population, the infrastructure, and the economic momentum that would make California a state in 1850, just 2 years after the discovery at Sutter's Mill. It established San Francisco as the dominant city of the American West. It attracted the diverse population that still defines the region. And it embedded in California's identity a sense of possibility, risk, and reinvention. The idea that you could arrive with nothing and build something, that fortunes could change overnight, that the future was unwritten. Standing here now, looking at these reconstructed scenes, it's hard not to think about what it must have felt like. To arrive in a place barely on the map and watch it explode into a city before your eyes. To risk everything on a rumor. To live in a moment when the rules were being written in real time. Most of the 49ers never found gold, but they found something else. A city being born. A new world taking shape. And whether they knew it or not, they were building the future. If there's another moment in history, another city, or another transformation you'd like to see brought back to life, let me know in the comments. I'd love to keep exploring these places where everything changed. Thank you for watching.